delighted to have with us the Ambassador of Germany to Greece, Ambassador Jens Plötner. He's been in Greece for 2.5 years now, and before that, as a career diplomat, he's also served as a Chief of Staff to Foreign Minister Frank Steinmeier, and also as a spokesman for the German Foreign Office. So you're certainly well-versed. And if I can start with being in Delphi, I thought I should start with our cultural ties of our two countries. And studying a little bit of German in high school, I was struck by how close the syntax is of the German language to the ancient Greek one. Very logical, solid, very long sentences occasionally. So I'm wondering, in modern day Greece, do you see any similarities in the way of thinking that this kind of affiliation suggests?
Good morning, and thank you for your interest in our conversation. Indeed, I think language has an important influence on the way you think and reason, and the German language in its structure has a lot of similarities with the Greek one. So one could deduce that that is a determining factor. But then again, honestly, I think the geographical difference between our two countries is such that despite whatever similarities there might be in the language structure, probably that is more important of a factor.
Coming to modern day, obviously, and during the crisis, the bilateral relationship has been through a lot. And German popularity in Greece, even though starting from a high percentage point, has actually dropped during the crisis. Where do we stand now? How would you describe the state of relations between the two countries?
You know, I was invited to a talk in Germany a few months ago about Greek-German relationships, and the best metaphor I could invent for our relationship was actually the title of my short intervention there was Love in the Roller Coaster. Love in the roller coaster because there have been very many ups and downs, and the ups are obvious. You know, Germany was a contributor to the Philhellenic movement, beginning of Greek independence, König Otto from Bavaria, and another positive aspect, work migration in the 50s and 60s to Germany. We pride ourselves of being home to many who fled the military dictatorship in Greece. In the 70s, former Foreign Minister Nikos Kotsias is only one example. Professor Simitis is another one. So all these are highlights in our relationship. But then, as the roller coaster often also goes down, I think the lowest moment was obviously the German occupation during the Second World War, with untold crimes being committed by German soldiers here. And then, no comparison, but more recently, during the economic and financial crisis, which started out in America, became global, became European, and then became also Greek. We were pitted against each other as if this was a Greek-German issue. I guess it was easier to communicate it this way, but that too was a very difficult phase. Today, I think we're into calmer waters. I think there is an interesting dialectic aspect to the crisis we went through during the discussions on the different programs for Greece. I think we got to know each other better in a very painful way. I wish it hadn't been that way, but I think we got to know each other better. Many Greeks are now specialists in German domestic politics. They didn't want to, but they had to. And we too have, you know, come to know different characters of Greek policymakers, from Mr. Varoufakis to more how shall I say, easy to deal with personalities, for us at least. So we have come to know each other better, and I think today our relationship is more mature. We know each other better, we have maybe less illusions about each other, and in that sense, maybe, you know, this difficult period was also a precursor to what once will be European domestic politics. Because the way the financial structure of the Eurozone is discussed in the budget committee of the German Bundestag has a direct implication on other Eurozone countries, on Greece. So we have one domestic politics. And the way you protect your border has a direct influence on us because it's our common border. So, so I think this could also be a symptom which we will see more of, but hopefully not in this violent and also very injuring way in which it was done during our last crisis.
Yeah. So let me jump, since you mentioned Europe and how the European policy is coming together, to talk about how the crisis affected the European Union structures and increasing intergovernmentalism as a functional way of taking decisions under crisis. Is Germany comfortable with this model? Does it go at all against the European treaties, or is it something, should we still be aspiring to more federalism? And can it be combined with, you know, this idea that you're mentioning of a more political Europe as well?
A few minutes ago, the former governor of the Central Bank of Portugal was sitting here. And I think this is one fact when we speak here in Greece about the Greek program we should never forget. Greece was not the only country which had a severe crisis. See the ambassador of Ireland here. So there already you have 3 countries who went through a program. Now, why was the Greek one more painful? Why has it taken longer? I think, logically speaking, probably this has causes which have to do with the structure of Greek public administration, of Greek finances in general, and not so much with the crisis itself. The crisis lay bare underlying problems. Now, how did we fix it? I think nobody can pretend that we did a job without any mistake, because we did it for the first time. The structures of the Union, of the Eurozone, were not built to deal with such a crisis, and so we had to learn by doing, and there were mistakes done, and they were detrimental to Greece and to the people. But I think we've learned, and that is the important thing after committing a mistake, to not to do it a second time and to learn. Today our structures are more robust. We are heading for even robuster structures, speaking about banking union and other elements of enhanced integration. And in doing so, I think we are sticking to what students of European integration call the method Monnet. That is incremental integration when tackling a concrete problem.
Well, speaking about the structure of the Eurozone and how we are better prepared for a next possible crisis, how do you see this going forward with countries like, I mean, the tensions with Italy, and there's a lot of concern within Greece as well that at some point maybe we might need to go back to a bailout at some point. There's been a public debate about that in the political sphere, and I'm wondering, do you think that back then it will, if should that happen with any country, frankly, are we prepared for less drama, and will we be more efficient, and will the political realities in Germany and other countries will be more receptive to actually helping each other out? Because, you know, the crisis will happen.
I think undoubtedly we are better prepared because we have gained a lot of experience. The fact that we have now handled the end phase of the Greek program basically with very little IMF involvement shows that our own mechanisms have matured and we have developed them. We are working on carrying them even further. I mentioned the banking union. But obviously, Italy reminds us that our instruments are better, but they are not such that we can relax and lay back and say, now we are in full control, especially big economies like the Italian ones will be very difficult to cope with crises in these big economies, even with our enhanced instrumentarium. So what is the solution for Italy? I think it's a learning process on both sides, how to communicate with each other. And my belief is that the underlying truth must be aware to all that we depend on each other. It really is a two-way street from Rome to Brussels.
And regarding the Greek crisis, do you think, are you comfortable to say that it is over? What do you think still needs to be done in order for Greece to be out of the woods, if it's not already?
I've been here now 2 years, and you know, following the reforms has been one of my main tasks, which Berlin gave me when coming here. I am surprised that there is also in Greece not such an awareness of how much has actually been achieved. And I think much more has been achieved than meets the eye. I take one example, unifying I think it was 14 retirement schemes which existed in Greece. In Germany, we have 3, and we've been talking about unifying them for I don't know, decades, and we haven't managed. So doing this is such an administrative and political Hercules act, and this was done in the middle of a crisis together with many, many other reforms. So, so I think people here can really be proud of what has been accomplished. And that it's a story which needs to be told also in Europe. But the truth also is, my impression is, there are some areas where the reform is almost a generational project. Take, for example, the reform of public administration or of the justice system. This is nothing you can do in one legislature, even in 2. This is something which will take 10, 15 years. So you really need politicians who, for 10, 15 years, remain dedicated to doing that, pushing this ball up the hill, to invest political capital, because there are difficult choices, uncomfortable choices to be made. And yeah. Will there be this determination for the next 10 years to continue with this path of reforms in the same way? I think that is the key question, and that's the key to success as well. So I think much has been done, but it really needs to be continued.
On this resolve to continue the reforms, talking among ourselves, Greek economists and journalists who have been following the crisis for a while, we end back going to, we need the reforms in order to attract FDI because we've lost foreign direct investment, because we've lost so much GDP that in order to recover, you really need this influx of foreign capital to Greece, let alone to fund Greek businesses here. And how do you see that going between Germany and Greece, like in German investment coming to Greece? Because there has been some frustration in the country that there hasn't been enough European interest in investing in Greece, not from the institutions necessarily, but from private companies.
I think that if you look at German FDI here, those are quite remarkable sums. We have German Telecom, which is a heavy stock stakeholder in OTE, and they have been investing in the last years more than 2.5 billion euros here. You have Fraport, which has been investing since it took over the 14 regional airports, more than $500 million euros, and it's going on. You have the airport in Athens, where we have a Canadian-German partners. The concession has now been prolonged. Another $500 million euros of planned investments over the next years. So there is a lot going on. A lot of big investments, and I'm not talking about tourism, which is another big chunk. What we don't see, and there I agree with you, is the smaller and medium-sized companies coming here, which would really go into the width of the country. If I talk to German investors who come here, there are two things which they mention, which then often dissuade them to invest. One is the opaque structure of public administration, and the second one is the justice system, where they are in admiration of the quality of the judicial work, but it's simply very slow. And they say, if I can't get, my day in court, then maybe it's difficult in combination with an administration I don't really understand to invest here. So that is why I think these are the two areas which need to be tackled in order to attract more FDI. That's the feedback I get.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm conscious of a Kathimerini report that you will be leaving us soon to lead the political Directorate General for German foreign policy within the EU towards North America, Russia and Central Asia. Is that the... Okay, including security policy, by the way. And to take us out of Greece and in your new role for a moment here, given your experience in the region, Germany was a vocal supporter of the Prespas Agreement, and it also was expressed during Chancellor Merkel's trip to Athens. Do you see a bigger role for Greece in the region, and do you see, from Berlin, how do you view the prospects for the Western Balkans going forward, towards Europe, maybe?
I think the strategic importance of Greece has significantly increased in the last years. And I see two major factors which have led to this significant increase. One is of Greece's own making. To put it a little bit polemically, in a little polemic way, a few years ago, when you looked at Southeastern Europe, you could get the impression that rather than being part of the solution, Greece was part of the problem. And this has significantly changed. I think today, you mentioned the Prespas Agreement, which of course is a diplomatic landmark and cannot be underestimated in its importance. I would add the well-balanced, cool-headed approach we see in Athens in diplomatic relations to Turkey. And I would also add the reach out which has been undertaken towards Albania, where a lot of progress has been made, and that nothing has been concluded, I think, is more due to inner Albanian issues than it is to a lack of will from Athens. So all of these are elements of a foreign policy which has been practiced here from Athens in the last years, which we applaud and which we consider to be an important contribution to stabilizing this region. And that is why during the visit of Chancellor Merkel, she underlined that she would very much welcome today Greece's participation in the so-called Berlin process, where we are bringing together the countries of the Western Balkans. But this is one reason of your own making that Greece has an enhanced strategic role. And the second one is the developments in the region. The war in Syria, Russian presence now militarily in Syria, the developments in Turkey, refugee issue. So all of that leads to the region becoming more important, and luckily this is coinciding with the Greek foreign policy, which is very constructive and in our eyes very positive, and that is needed because I think we need to altogether refocus on the Western Balkans and make sure that all we have achieved there since the Dayton agreements does not slowly slip away between our fingers. And for that we need Greece, and we are happy to find a very constructive partner here in Athens for that.
Being based in DC for the past few years, I'm also conscious of the American perspective on that, and there are certainly concerns that the Western Balkans there's been effort to destabilize the region. They point at Russia, and also increasingly of a concern about an increasingly authoritarian Turkey in the region, and the aggression and its strategy in Syria, which seems to be independent from what is happening in NATO and what the alliance would like to see happening in the region. So do you share these concerns, and is it something that you feel should have a united response within our American allies?
I think this is the way international politics work, that a void never remains a void for a very long time, but it is quickly filled by others. And often we see a pattern where our a bit more distant partners in Moscow or in other places take advantage of our weaknesses. So I think this calls for a more active engagement, and I think that the role Washington and also we in Europe played to kind of stabilize the environment for policymakers here and in Skopje to make the deal was a good example. And I think if we look at the Western Balkans, this is something which the United States and Europe together helped fix. And the Dayton agreements stand for that. And today I think we need a new drive in that direction in order to fend off malign influences we see, which are either trying to destabilize, and here we need to speak of Russian maneuvering, but also who try to influence and control in their own way, and here we need to speak of Chinese engagement. So this is my core belief, that if we look at the broad challenges we are facing in international politics today, that's the role of Russia, that's the rise of China, there can only be one answer to that, and this answer has to be an answer from Europe and America together. We Europeans stand ready to do that with Washington, and I know that there are many people in DC who also feel that these problems are best addressed as a unified West.
Still, in the American national security strategy, Russia and China are deemed as adversaries. Would you share that view, or do you have a more nuanced due to regional and interdependent nature of your relationship, say, with Russia? And how would you differentiate yourself in your approach to Russia?
I wouldn't put Russia and China in the same basket. I think we need to have a very distinct policy towards each one of them, but this policy has to be different. If you look at China, we do not see China broadly acting in a destructive manner. This is a power which has the feeling, for 2,000 years, we were number one in the world. In the last 100 or 200, we weren't for different reasons. And now we just want to go back to the place where we were for 2,000 years. So what's your problem? Now, we have issues with that, but I think we need to communicate with China in a way which, first of all, says, we respect your aspiration to finding the role on the world stage which you deserve, given your culture, given your history, and given your size, and given your strength. So, welcome to be a partner on the world stage, but let's talk about the rule book, because we believe that we need a common rule book, and we need to agree on this rule book together. We need strong international institutions, which China has the impression it has a capacity of influencing, but where we can then, in the counterpart, ask China to abide by these rules. So this would be, very broadly speaking, I think the right approach towards China. And we are best served if the states and the EU together have this policy towards China, because obviously the Chinese are extremely talented diplomats, and they will not fail to realize that if there is a breach they can accentuate between Europe and America, they will do so. So we have to be aware of that risk. Russia is another ballgame, and here we see in many areas destructive policies. But at the same time, we here in Europe, Russia will not go away. So in some way, we have to deal with it. And here our policy is, I think, that we have to be very clear when it comes to Russian wrongdoing in many ways, Russians' destructive policies, which we witness. But at the same time, we are convinced that we need to keep the channels of communication open. Because if we don't do that, if we don't constantly try to engage with this difficult neighbor we have, if we don't constantly try to engage with this difficult neighbor, then one thing will happen for sure. It will slowly drift eastwards into the hands of China. And do we want that?
Now, last night there was a dinner panel on transatlantic relations, and I found it to be quite pessimistic in the way that the approach was going, and on whether the damage is irreparable of what's been done during the Trump presidency. And what is your view of the current administration and its relations with Europe and the Europe? Well, I would hope for you to answer that question so that we can.
Honestly speaking, on a personal note, I'm a bit tired of this lamenting about President Trump and about his style of communication. He has been elected president. He is the way he is. This is a factor we have to take. Point one. Point two, one of the things which were pointed out yesterday is that many things President Trump is asking for were also things President Obama asked for. For example, more European spending on defense. So in that sense, I would advocate a more cool-headed approach towards this presidency, not so much looking at the style, but looking at the substance. And there are areas where I feel President Trump has a point to make and where we need to do our homework. What I am worried about is that we are maybe not as much as in the past focusing on our partnership and focusing on the values of being allies, even in difficult times, and realizing that we are best served in meeting the global challenges when America and Europe act together. So this is, I think, something we should focus on. This is something we need to talk about with our American partners. But let's be cool-hearted and headed, and let's focus on substance and work on that.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you.